You have a bucket list?
For as long as I can remember, the Tank Museum at Bovington has been on my bucket list. As most of you would know, the Tank Museum is widely considered among the best armoured vehicle collections in the world. So when the opportunity to visit arose late last year, I could hardly contain my excitement. Obviously everyone knows the Tiger and it's the rock star of the collection, but I purposely avoided researching the exhibits because I wanted to feel that sense of excitement, like opening a Christmas present as I went through the halls. Today I'll take you on a walk through and I'll share my thoughts as well as some of the exhibits that caught my eye. The main hall at the Tank Museum, also known as the Tank Story Hall, was part of a major redevelopment of the museum that was completed and opened in 2009 and is set up as a homage to the history of the tank, with a starting point looking at the very first examples. Now, my humour has been known to border on juvenile, and as tempting as it is to lean into this low-hanging fruit, I would imagine you've heard it all before anyway. Little Willie, I have to say, I was gobsmacked. I had no idea I'd be saying the first and oldest tank in existence. It was strangely emotional for this armour tragic. And next to that, the last surviving Mark II, with the left-hand sponson removed, offering that claustrophobic glance into the belly of the beast. And then next to that, Whippet Caesar II went into action in August 1918 and was commanded by Lieutenant Cecil Sewell. Now, during the battle, Sewell jumped out of his tank to help some soldiers who were trapped in an overturned tank. He saved them, however, he was killed in the process, and his actions later earned him the Victoria Cross for bravery. And if that's not enough, the FT-17 is another glimpse into the evolution of tank warfare. The first section of the museum pays homage to the birth of the tank during the outbreak of the Great War, and then the evolution of it up to the Second World War. The next section of the journey covers the Blitzkrieg years, with one of my favourite early war tanks, the Panzer II, sitting there for all to enjoy, closely followed by the strangely appealing Mark IV and cruiser tanks. And whilst I've never been much of a fan of French armour, seeing that Char B1 with its heavy metal tones and textures, it was hard not to be moved. You can almost sense the history of this tank and imagine the stories it could tell. I don't really know what it was or why I am so fascinated with the Second World War. Maybe some of you out there can shed some light on that attraction, but ever since I was a little kid, I couldn't look through the history books enough or study the pages of the Tamiya catalogues enough to satisfy my thirst. And then, of course, the star of the show, or at least the tank that is arguably spoken of most in model building and tank historian circles, the Tiger I. Tiger 131, the only running Tiger I tank in the world. After the war, the tank became part of the museum's collection and was later restored to running condition. Every weld seam, tow cable, bullet hole and bracket studied to the nth degree by thousands of people that came before me, and here I was doing all those same things. My trance-like state was soon broken with the rattle and rumble of a Matilda II making its way through the roller door. Named the Princess Royal after Her Royal Highness Princess Anne, who opened the Tank Museum's new workshop, and as luck would have it, I was able to get a look over this one. Seeing these things from a distance is one thing, but getting the opportunity to climb on them and interact with them was something I'll honestly never forget.
So what's a Panzer key look like?
Well, Panzer's starting key, driver's key, and then we actually have the padlocks on it if you want to have a look inside.
Wow, that would be unreal.
Then a look inside the Panzer III. I've always felt that the Panzer III was a little underrated and undervalued as a vehicle. That chassis really carried the German war effort in so many ways, particularly in the early war period, but it is often overlooked in favour of some of the heavier hitters, so to be touching and interacting with one now was something just unforgettable. As a modeller, I find so much calm and enjoyment out of studying the detail and building the stories behind the wear and tear. There are not too many more identifiable tanks than the T-34, and every time I see one, I fall for them just a little more. That T-34 sloped armour revolutionised tank design at the time and became the direct inspiration for the German Panther, even down to them copying an identifiable plate on the inner face of the hull near the idler. It turns out the purpose of that plate was to knock and reset the pins of the T-34 tracks as they moved around the wheels, and it was a non-issue for the Panther. However, that plate made its way into early designs nonetheless. For me, the lines of the T-34-76 are far more interesting than the upgunned 85. It was a treat to see them in the flesh. Then, of course, the natural progression in the museum journey was the Panther. Germany fast-tracked the Panther's development, as I mentioned, adopting sloped armour and improved mobility concepts directly inspired from the T-34, while combining them with superior optics and a high-velocity 75mm gun. The result was a technologically advanced tank, though more complex and initially less reliable than the simpler, rugged T-34. I caught a glimpse of this entering the hall, but to be up close and personal with the duplex drive or DD Sherman decked out in its waiting kit was something I wasn't expecting. The thought of trying to land these things from a landing craft in rough seas is horrifying at best. The space then takes a glimpse into Hobart's funnies and featured the flame-throwing Churchill as well as some of the Allied vehicles used during the liberation of Europe. The main hall is really an overview of sorts of the development of the tank throughout those years, and the bulk of the collection was soon to come. The final sections of this main hall, however, took a look at the Cold War era tanks such as the Chieftain and the T-62 and presented the Challenger 2 as the example of a modern tank design. And this is where things started to get a little more specialised with the 1916 trench experience. It's an immersive experience that allows you to walk in the footsteps of a World War I soldier, from the recruiting office up to the frontline trenches. Walking into the space with the World War I tanks came as a bit of a surprise to me. One, I had absolutely no idea the museum housed such an extensive collection of World War I armour. And two, just how much seeing these pieces affected me. The history, the scale, the fact you could get up close and personal and even inside some of these vehicles was an experience that has stayed with me. To think what some of these men went through and the conditions under which they fought is really hard to fathom. The diversity and unique nature of some of these interwar pieces was extraordinary, and I certainly never expected to see an A1E1 on display here. And as mentioned earlier, I don't know what it is that's attracted me to the Second World War as a child, but as long as I can remember, I have been obsessed with it. The stories of the soldiers and the details around the battles became an obsession, but most of all, I was fascinated by the vehicles and the technology that the necessity of war often produced. There is something special around the lines and shapes of these vehicles that fought in the Second World War. Doesn't matter if it was an early war or late, to me the designs were perfect, no matter how quirky or ugly. I guess for me it is just like the feeling I get when I look at a muscle car from the 60s. Kind of like the design's got everything just right and nothing could ever get any better. A feeling I stand by today. There were far too many vehicles to photograph and share in any detail here, and unfortunately I was fighting against the clock. However, I did the best I could to bring you some of the subjects that particularly caught my eye, so I hope you enjoy.
How long would people usually spend going through here?
Typical visit is 4 to 5 hours.
Yeah.
One of the more interesting subjects is the Stug 3G they have on display. The Stug is always a bit of a crowd favourite. However, this one is particularly special as I believe the Zimmerit and finish are all original. Something that can be quite rare in a museum setting like this, especially for a subject like this.
This is a place that will appeal to so many people from all walks of life. This is for the historians, the modelers, the mums and dads just looking to entertain the kids on a Sunday outing, or simply somewhere for us to preserve the past, to share with future generations. Seeing some of these vehicles like the kangaroo and the ram in the flesh is something I never thought I'd get to see in my life. It was really something special.
The weasel brought on a flood of bad memories, but it was very cool to see one here in the museum.
Man, they're so big, aren't they?
And what better way to finish the World War II section than with the Jag Panther and the Jag Tiger. The word impressive just does not cut it.
The next hall in the flow of things is dedicated to post-World War II tanks, and to my surprise they had an FV4005 as well as an A39 Tortoise, and although finished in 1941, the TOG 2 prototype was tucked away in the corner of the room. Mind was officially blown.
Various armour pieces from the conflict in Ukraine are then on display, such as the T90 and the Marder. Tanks for the Memories was the next display, paying homage to the tanks and vehicles that appear in movies, comics, video games, as well as toys and art. This was all about those subjects that are part of popular culture. This, of course, includes a dedicated display celebrating the scale modeler and the interconnectedness of this hobby and the history of armour. The armour collection on display is incredibly impressive, but to get a glimpse at some of this stuff that hasn't made the floor really does take your breath away. This is the stuff there is no room for or possibly waiting restoration, like this incredibly rare King Tiger. This King Tiger is the oldest surviving King Tiger in existence. It was the second of 492 King Tigers to be built, and it's the only surviving King Tiger to have been fitted with the pre-production turret. 50 of those had been built for the abandoned Porsche design. They were repurposed for use on the earliest King Tigers. This tank is the subject of one of the Tank Museum's most ambitious projects, and that is to get this tank up into running condition. The restoration will take place in the workshop, of which, again, I was lucky enough to get a look around. The team had already started sifting through the available parts for the restoration, and it was an interesting exercise trying to identify the bits and pieces in the baskets. There was a varied and interesting array of subjects getting worked on. However, the one that was instantly recognisable was the Easy 8 Sherman. The tank, known as Fury, was there getting a fine tune, and I couldn't help but be a little starry-eyed seeing the movie star in the flesh. I guess a 35th scale M4 A2 E8 is in my future sometime soon. It became apparent as we moved through the halls that the museum had been set up to cater to visitors of all ages, with a vast number of interactive and tactile displays. There is always something to do and see. This is a place geared to families, but it offers so much more for those of us who are obsessed with armour. As a modeller, it's the opportunity to see and feel the sense of scale, as well as immerse yourself in and around these tanks. It's the chance to study every weld seam and bolt, every chip or bent fender, with the thought of one day replicating that in scale. And what trip to a museum doesn't end up in a gift shop? And this one was certainly one of the better ones I've ever seen.
Getting any model?
Oh, I shouldn't.
Pardon?
I shouldn't.
This was a pilgrimage for me and a once in a lifetime experience that I will remember for the rest of my life. So to you, if you've made it to the end of this video, thank you for sharing this journey with me.
Best day ever.